The Champions League final has been decided. It will be PSG versus Arsenal, England versus France.
Arsenal are on the verge of achieving something even Arsene Wenger's Invincibles never achieved.
They beat Atletico to reach the first Champions League final in 20 years. Well done, Arteta.
Not just winning the Premier League, but conquering Europe too. And that is what makes this season terrifyingly close to becoming the greatest season in Arsenal's entire history. Because this was supposed to be the year everything collapsed again. 3 straight second-place finishes. Years of being called nearly men.
Arsenal finished it. I don't care about Spurs now. We've got to win the Prem. It can't be 4 seasons in a row second. Whatever else happens, happens. Not our problem. We've got to win this one.
Patrice Evra turning Arsenal into a Netflix joke. A brutal injury crisis involving Saka, Odegaard, Saliba, Gabriel, Timber and Calafiori. A Carabao Cup loss to Manchester City. An FA Cup collapse against Southampton. Weeks where critics said Arsenal were nothing more than a glorified set-piece team surviving on corners and fear football. But somehow they survived all of it. And now, after beating Atletico Madrid to reach their first Champions League final in 20 years, Arsenal sit on the edge of football immortality, with PSG standing between them and history. A first ever Champions League, a possible Premier League and Champions League double, a season that could completely redefine Mikel Arteta's legacy forever. So how did Arsenal go from broken, mocked and emotionally fragile to potentially becoming the most complete team in Europe? And could this actually become the side that finally surpasses the Invincibles? This is the story of how Arsenal went from almost men to 1 match away from immortality. Let me open your mind to these facts. Before Arsenal became a team capable of chasing the Premier League and Champions League in the same season, they were a club trying to remember what elite football even felt like. The Emirates had gone anxious, the football looked disconnected, the players looked unsure of themselves. The club that once defined style and belief under Wenger had slowly become a team stuck between identities, not bad enough to rebuild completely, not good enough to compete seriously. Emery got sacked in November 2019, Ljungberg held the fort briefly, and by the time Arteta walked back in December, Arsenal weren't behaving like a giant waiting to wake up. They looked like a club quietly drifting away from the elite level. That's why Arteta's first message mattered, and it wasn't about formations. He spoke about responsibility, about energy, about people not hiding. His line was direct: I want people to take responsibility for their jobs, and anyone with a negative effect wasn't good enough for the environment he was building. The rebuild didn't start on the tactics board, it started in the dressing room. Because Arsenal's biggest problem wasn't tactical, it was behavioural. They could play well for 20 minutes and vanish for the next 30, look brave at home, fragile away, dominate the ball, and still feel vulnerable every time an opponent crossed halfway. Arteta understood that before Arsenal could become a serious football team, they had to become a serious environment first. Then came the 2020 FA Cup, and people underrated what that run actually meant. In the semi-final, Arsenal beat Manchester City 2-0 at Wembley. Aubameyang scored twice, but the performance was bigger than the goals. They didn't try to out-City, they stayed compact, protected central spaces, and attacked what City left behind. Disciplined, not pretty. Then in the final, against Chelsea, they fell behind early, exactly the kind of moment that used to swallow previous Arsenal teams whole, and Aubameyang dragged them back, scored twice, and Arsenal won 2-1 to lift a record 14th FA Cup. That trophy gave the players something they desperately needed, not hope, evidence. They'd beaten City, beaten Chelsea, won at Wembley under pressure. For a club that had spent years being accused of softness, that wasn't nothing. But early trophies can lie to you, because Arsenal was still not fixed. They finished 8th in 2019-20, then 8th again in 2020-21. That second 8th place finish ended their 25-year run of European qualification. For the first time since the mid-1990s, Arsenal were outside Europe completely. That's the part of the Arteta story people sometimes skip past too quickly. Before the title races, before Declan Rice, before the Champions League nights, there were league tables that looked embarrassing for a club of that size. Fan protests, Arteta out arguments, young players making young players' mistakes, experienced players who didn't fit the new direction, matches where Arsenal had a plan but not the authority to impose it. And yet Arsenal didn't sack him. That decision is one of the most important parts of this whole story. The board weren't judging Arteta by weekend scorelines. They believed he was rebuilding the internal operating system of the entire club. The recruitment changed, the age profile changed, the dressing room hierarchy changed, the type of player Arsenal targeted changed. They stopped chasing names for excitement and started chasing profiles for function. Gabriel Magalhaes, aggression and front foot defending. Odegaard, technical leadership between the lines. Saliba, calm, recovery pace, elite 1v1 defending. Ben White, tactical flexibility. Rice, dual power and defensive security. Havertz, height, pressing intelligence, positional versatility. Raya, a goalkeeper comfortable enough with his feet to help Arsenal control territory. That was the real recruitment revolution. Arsenal weren't just buying players, they were buying behaviours. Players who could handle pressure, defend space, press with discipline, win duels and still stay calm on the ball. Slowly, Arsenal stopped looking like a collection of individuals and started looking like a team built around repeatable principles. By 2022-23, the world finally saw it. They beat Crystal Palace away on the opening night, pressed with conviction, played through pressure with confidence. By the halfway stage, 50 points from 19 games, their best ever start to a Premier League season. Suddenly, Arsenal weren't rebuilding anymore, they were leading. But that season also created the first deep scar. Because they weren't just close, they were in control for so long that losing it felt heavier than a normal collapse. Saka and Martinelli stretching teams every week, Odegaard looking like the leader of a new era, Saliba and Gabriel giving them the centre-back platform they'd been missing for years. Then the pressure changed. Saliba's back injury in March became one of the defining moments of the run-in. They lost the defensive calm that allowed them to defend high and squeeze matches, and what followed wasn't one catastrophic night, it was the slow, horrible feeling of control slipping. A 2-2 at Liverpool after leading 2-0, a chaotic 3-3 at home with bottom side Southampton, by the way, who were relegated that season. Then the one everyone remembers, Manchester City 4-1, the Etihad. That night felt like experience versus innocence. City knew exactly what those moments required. Arsenal looked like a team that had built the perfect dream, but hadn't yet learned how to protect it when the whole football world started pressing against their chest. City were champions, Arsenal were nearly men. And that label stuck, because after 2023, every wobble carried a memory, every dropped point became evidence, every poor half became a warning, every rival fan had the same script ready. Arsenal start well, Arsenal dream, Arsenal fall short. Then 2023-24 arrived, and Arsenal genuinely improved. More mature, more defensively secure, more controlled. They finally beat City in the league, 1-0 at the Emirates in October 2023, ending a 12-match losing streak against them. They produced 28 wins, 89 points, 91 league goals, a club record in the Premier League era, and still finished second, 2 points behind City. Even on the final day, when Havertz scored late against Everton and Arsenal did everything asked of them, City won their match. Someone else lifted the trophy. Again. This was no longer a young team overachieving. This was a serious team producing serious numbers and finishing second anyway. That's a different kind of pain. Then 2024-25 cut even deeper. Arsenal eliminated Real Madrid 5-1 on aggregate in the Champions League quarter-final, beating the holders, reaching their first semi-final since 2009. That should have felt like a breakthrough moment. Instead, it became another chapter of frustration, because PSG beat them 3-1 on aggregate in the semis, and Arsenal finished second in the Premier League for a third consecutive season. Now the mockery had a pattern to hold on to. The bottle job label got louder, the mentality questions got louder, and Patrice Evra's line, "Watching Arsenal is like watching Netflix, you always wait for the next season," went viral, because it sounded cruel, but to rival fans, it felt effortless, like something that wrote itself. That's the weight Arsenal carried into 2025-26. Not just pressure to win, pressure to end the joke, pressure to prove the rebuild wasn't just beautiful development with no final act, pressure to prove the FA Cup in 2020 wasn't the peak, pressure to prove 2022-23 was a lesson, not a permanent flaw, pressure to prove that beating Real Madrid wasn't just another European memory that led nowhere. The club had moved from broken to believing, but belief alone wasn't enough anymore. Now, they had to finish the story.
Arsenal came into 2025-26 like a team that had genuinely run out of patience with themselves. No emotional chaos, no wide-eyed innocence. 3 second-place finishes in a row. They walked into the new season carrying one uncomfortable truth. Improvement wasn't the goal anymore. Winning was. Early on, they played like they understood that completely. Arsenal opened the Premier League with a 1-0 win away at Manchester United, Calafiori scoring from a Rice corner before August was even finished. Then came a 5-0 demolition of Leeds at the Emirates that was almost unsettling in how complete it looked. Set pieces, pressing, full-back aggressions, central control, and Gyökeres already giving the attack a different physical edge. By October, Saka, Gyökeres and Martinelli were tied as leading scorers, which told you something important. This wasn't a team with one route to goal. The threat was everywhere. That was the real difference. Before, Arsenal could look brilliant but fragile, a team that needed things to go right to look right. This version had learned how to control matches without needing everything to be beautiful. Zubamendi changed the rhythm at the base of midfield. His arrival from Real Sociedad gave Arsenal a calmer number 6, comfortable receiving under pressure, recycling possession and freeing Rice to operate between destroyer, carrier and late box arriver depending on what the game needed. Suddenly, Rice had permission to be more than just a defensive screen. Eze, signed from Crystal Palace for £67.5 million, gave them something different again. Arteta's attack had become too predictable when Odegaard was unavailable or tightly marked. Eze brought pause, disguise, carrying power and a 1v1 threat from central left spaces. He could hurt you without needing a perfect structure to work from. Then there was Gyökeres, and this one deserves a proper moment. The Arsenal need a striker conversation had become its own recurring comedy for years. Gyökeres didn't solve every problem, but he gave them something genuinely missing. A forward who could run channels, pin centre-backs, attack crosses, and turn average territory into pressure. Defenders could no longer focus purely on the pass. They had to respect the runner. That changes how an entire attack functions. Behind them all, the structure was serious. Saliba and Gabriel remained the best kind of defensive partnership, calm and controlled aggression in the same unit. Raya wasn't just making saves, he was part of the possession structure, helping Arsenal build higher and compress the pitch. The football felt mature because it was mature. Clear pressing triggers, better spacing against counterattacks, managing periods of games rather than chasing every 5-minute spell. When they had control, they didn't rush. When they lost it, they didn't panic. In Europe, that maturity became even clearer. Arsenal finished the Champions League phase with 8 wins from 8, then went through Leverkusen, Sporting CP and Atletico through the knockouts. By the time they beat Atletico 1-0 in the semi-final second leg, they'd extended their unbeaten run in the competition to 14 matches.
The only team across 44 Champions League campaigns of that length to go through an entire edition without losing once. The Atletico performance said everything about who this Arsenal had become. No wild attacking exhibition, just a cold, controlled knockout performance. Rice making a crucial early block, Lewis-Skelly composed in midfield, Trossard creating, Saka reacting fastest to score. Atletico managed chances worth just 0.5 expected goals. Elite teams don't always dominate the scoreboard, they dominate the conditions of the match. And the set pieces. We have to talk about the set pieces. Since 2023-24, Arsenal had scored 33 goals from corners, more than any Premier League side, and 10 more than any other major European team in that period. By 2025-26, that weapon had become almost controversial, which is genuinely one of the funnier developments in modern football. People were upset that Arsenal were too good at corners, a legal, practiced, repeatable part of the game. Arteta defended it without apology, and he was absolutely right to. For the first time under Arteta, Arsenal didn't just look talented, they looked equipped. For ugly games, for injuries, for teams that sat deep and teams that pressed high. Equipped for the kind of season where emotion alone gets you nowhere. That's why people started believing, not just because they played perfect football every week, because they looked like a team with answers. Then the injuries started, and that's where the season changed. Saka, Odegaard, Gabriel, Saliba, Timber, Calafiori, Hincapié, Mosquera. At various points, all of them had spells out. Timber's groin injury was especially damaging. 9 matches missed after going down against Everton in March. The passing slowed. The rotations became safer. The football that once looked controlled started to look cautious. And then the results made everything louder. Carabao Cup final lost 2-0 to City. FA Cup quarterfinal knocked out by Southampton 2-1 at St. Mary's. Southampton. Then Premier League defeats to Bournemouth and City, narrowing the title race and reviving every old fear instantly. This was the exact moment previous Arsenal seasons had cracked. 2022-23, the title slipped under pressure. 2023-24 improved and still came up short. So when the injuries piled up, the cups went and City started closing, the question came back hard. Is this happening again? But this time, Arsenal didn't collapse. They bent, looked tired, had games where the creativity dried up and the crowd went nervous, but they stayed alive in the league and stayed alive in Europe. The turning point came with the 3-0 win over Fulham and the semi-final win over Atletico. Arsenal had scored just 6 goals in their previous 8 matches before Fulham. 6! But that performance restored tempo and belief. Saka returned with a goal involvement. Calafiori came back. Lewis-Skelly stepped into midfield. Rice dropped deeper. Suddenly, there was energy again. Suddenly, it looked like them again. Because this wasn't the season Arsenal avoided suffering. This was the season they finally learned how to survive it. Instead of breaking, Arteta adjusted. Instead of waiting for the perfect 11, he changed the rhythm with what he had. Instead of chasing the old version of Arsenal, he built another one. The season that started perfectly almost became another collapse. But instead of ending there, Arteta changed Arsenal again.